afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name is Ajay. Basically, I'm an architect, and then I did my master's in urban planning with a specialization in housing. And right now, I'm chairing a working group on housing in SEPT University. My basic interest, they've been always urban planning and housing, but after the 2001 major earthquake that happened in India, I actually worked in the epicenter and all the districts that were affected on the earthquake. After which, my line of work, my research interests have actually changed a little bit. I tried to understand how the Indian local authorities, the authorities that were governing the cities, can be strengthened so that next time if any event of that caliber or that intensity happens, they can make sure that the losses, the risk, the lives can be saved at least. So that's the basic area where I am working right now. Today I'm going to talk about one vulnerability from a little different perspective. Usually vulnerability is given as usually used by World Bank or the UN organizations to give some particular communities which are vulnerable to, say, substance abuse or the civil strife and other activities. But here I am going to use vulnerability to understand a community or household's vulnerability so that their susceptibility to get influenced by a external event actually gets exaggerated. So I am going to show you how that's being worked out in our research. Initially, I'll show a little bit about the city of Ahmedabad. It's the whole context is not here. We have a main river, Sabarmati, and next to Sabarmati, the city started in 1411. It's one of the ancient cities in India, and of course, subsequently it grew. And currently, we have a city. This is a little earlier. We have a city around 400 square kilometers now. This is how the city grew, different colors and which year, how much it grew. We just started. I'm just introducing the city of Ahmedabad and how the city has grown up from 1411 to till date. And I directly jump into the context of disaster management. We have ample agencies that are working in the disaster management area as such. You might have seen many of the institutions, you might have worked for many of them, like Geohazards, ADBC, FEMA, Provincial. There are many institutions which are working in disaster management, but I will explain why I am talking about this. And when we look at the context in India, yes, we do have some agencies which are working. Basically, all these institutions were started after the earthquake in 2001. Before that earthquake, the concept of disaster management was limited to the revenue department. Usually, disaster is called as if there is a crop failure, that's used to be the disaster. If there is a cyclone, how much of crop is lost, so that is calculated as a disaster. So everything was concentrated in the revenue department. But subsequently, after the earthquake of Bhuj in 2001, the disaster management setup has been moved into the Ministry of Home Affairs, and under which we have many other agencies at state level and in the district level as well sometimes. And this is one famous cycle which we talk about disaster management, because usually we think that, or rather many of the local authorities behave in a way that whenever there is an accident, whenever there is a disaster, they wake up from their slumber and they start working, usually on the response and the recovery part of it, cleaning the debris, reconstruction and relief and rescue stuff. After that, usually they stop. They get back to their regular work, maybe water supply or maybe solid waste collection or maybe drainage and sewage collection. The problem is that disaster actually do not work that way. Now our cities are growing much larger, more dense, so our investments per area is actually going to be very high. So if we have any incident, say earthquake or say landslide or say flood, the amount of loss we are going to incur is actually growing very fast. but our capacity to cope up is not growing very fast. We do not have much information about our hazards, what hazards our cities are going to face, what vulnerabilities we are prone to, we are susceptible to, and how to mitigate and prevent them from happening. And of course, preparedness and planning is a very far concept. Many of the local authorities are actually not working in that. Prediction and warning, I mean, you don't even have to mention that. In this presentation, I'm not going to talk about everything, but I'll be talking about only how vulnerability can be assessed and how vulnerability can be used so that the overall risk can be reduced. This is, how do we say, the technocrat's perspective of disaster management. I'll explain in a very few slides. There is a V, that what we connote the vulnerability. I'll go to a equation, how we usually calculate. This is elements at risk, what we call. These are all the buildings of different land use in the city of Ahmedabad. And what we are seeing here is the legend, even if we cannot see, so I did not put it here. The colors of different buildings are of different land use classifications. We have different buildings. We have around 1.7 million building in Ahmedabad. So we actually mapped all the buildings because none of the cities in India have any database where we can start and work further. So in this, because I teach sometimes in GIS also, so I had to take a big group of students to teach GIS, and then they actually did the field work. So it's around 60-70 months of work. Usually every data management, disaster management work needs a elements at risk, where your population is actually residing. Then we have some vulnerability curves. This is for usually seismic vulnerability assessment. What these curves are talking about is, this is average loss of these buildings. If you have 100% buildings, what percent of buildings will get lost at different PGA? PGA is a technical term which says how much ground is shaking. It's called peak ground acceleration. Based on that, the buildings will collapse based on these curves. So this gives us how many buildings are going to get damaged. Of course, if we are talking about flood hazard, you know that how much area is going to get inundated. This is the same river which we are seeing which you have seen in the first slide. So in the case of flood, we'll know that in hazard, how much of hazard we're getting. If you have any industries or if you have any chemical storages in your city, you will have different types of hazards. These are the footprints of those hazards. And sitting in the table, we actually calculate risk is equal to vulnerability times hazard times amount you are exposed to. So that's how usually a disaster manager who is from a technical background usually work. Here the problem is that we actually count buildings and population equally, because we don't know which type of person is there, what age group of person is there, which gender of the person is there. We are not sensitive to those aspects. So everything you say more or less is a slab, blanket saying, okay, this many people are going to get affected. Now, what we've been working on after the earthquake is that there are different communities that get differently affected in the same hazard. Even though the earthquake is of same intensity, the communities which are from different backgrounds, in terms of social, in terms of economic backgrounds, their plight is actually much higher than compared to the communities which are little well off. If you have your own resources to cope up back to your normalcy, of course you are not worried. You just take a vacation and you go somewhere else where situation is good. But if we don't have resources, if you don't have your share in the production and consumption system of the economy, you are very much in trouble. Don't talk about any hazard, any calamity, but you are already in trouble. So that's what I'm going to highlight in this presentation. There are some earlier studies which have looked at vulnerability from different perspectives. Basically what we are differentiating is that there are two types of vulnerabilities for people or community or any other society. One is the intrinsic vulnerability, which is the inherent characteristics of that particular group. Suppose a couple of guys go into rain and have a coffee. One of them catches cold, but the other doesn't get cold. They were exposed to the same condition, but still because their resilience is different, one is get exposed and the other one is not. Similarly, in terms of extrinsic vulnerability, of course, it's not in our hands. As some people say, it's the act of God. The shaking of earth is the act of God. So yeah, it's not in our hands. So that is the extrinsic vulnerability for which all of us are exposed. But the more intrinsic vulnerable the population is, the more the exaggeration of the effect of any disaster. So usually what we say is that any vulnerability is a function of basically your resources, your resilience capacity, your economic status, your social status. I mean, this is much important in the context of India. I mean, you might have known the systems of India's social systems, and of course, any external event which is a disaster, which is more geographic based. So, in one of the studies, we used the basic framework. We actually identified the communities which are exposed to flood in a northeastern state called Bihar, where there is a river called Kosi, which very often floods the total floodplain. And another problem is that the river actually in the last 20 years has migrated for around 100 kilometers. So the floodplain, which has been understood as a danger zone, has actually shifted. So the new population is getting exposed. So we did a study in the population of Kosi, where we collected the information at household level, both in terms of social, economic, and of course well-being, asset management level, and other parameters. Then of course we considered the extrinsic vulnerability also, how much of irrigation area, how much of agricultural land is getting inundated, and how much of their houses are getting inundated, and of course what type of coping mechanisms the societies themselves have developed over the time, and how many of them are actually dependent on the authority for the support.
The data you collected also data yourself or some agency has collected?
No, that we did ourselves. Our students and we were there, so we collected ourselves. Because right now we cannot rely on the agencies because they are not sensitive enough to understand why we are collecting this information, and we don't have time to actually sensitize them and canvas the instrument and go into the field. So we.
Can you tell us, can you get me to mind the methodology, how many courses you collected, how many the time frame that you took in to collect data? Very interesting.
We didn't have actually very vast data set. We had around 200 samples from one village. And there is a comparative sample from the other village which is not affected. So we had one control set and one affected set. Because it's a very small study, we wanted to actually test the hypothesis. We didn't actually go for a larger case study. And this is actually what I did for my PhD. How we can make an informed decision in keeping all this context in the background. Basically what we are trying to do is that we want to simulate or we want to model the world so that we can analyze it better, for which we actually we need to have a data inventory, the bigger map which I have shown, that type of data inventory so that we can make use of the geographical data and how that processes and models work. Because there are different models. You have population, some population is always floating, they're always on the road, they're always on the travel. Some population cannot leave the house because they are in the extreme age groups of the society. So different processes and different models will work out how many people of what type are at different places and how their capability and their susceptibility, sustainability will work, whether they have their own resources to cope up or not. Then of course you can create different scenarios where these people will get exposed or their capacity or resilience will come and rescue them. And of course, evaluation of these different consequences and different scenarios. And if we can provide all this information to the local authority, maybe the municipal commissioner or somebody, they can make a better decision and they can work in the direction of reducing the overall risk. So these are some of the indicators which we collected for understanding the physical vulnerability as well as the social vulnerability. This is a study a little closer to the earlier case where this is a river basin called Tista, which originates in the northern part of Sikkim and which meets the Bay of Bengal through Bangladesh, where we have some demographic parameters. This is a little larger scale. I'll tell you about the data set which we used here. This is a set of demographic parameters, set of economic parameters, social parameters, and of course the physical parameters, and how and why they are important. All this we can actually skip them. Why economic parameters is important? I mean, we all know that yes, apart from China, India is also booming in terms of economy. This is the monthly household income of Ahmedabad population in 2001. The yellow ones are in the slum population and the blue are the non-slum population. And if you see, the median is roughly around 7,200 rupees. And in the next 10 years, if you
That
see,
is annual income? Or
sorry,
that is monthly?
monthly income.
Okay.
In the next 10 years, of course, the median income has reached much higher because of so many interventions taken by the central government. But the problem is that even though the incomes have raised so much, the affordability of any household for a basic housing unit is still very, very high. The affordability is still not in the range.
This is a combined of slum and the other one?
Slum.
The yellow one are the slums.
No, the median income, 19,500 per month.
Yeah.
This is combined.
City level median income.
It's too high.
Ahmedabad is a little prosperous.
Especially last decade.
Yeah. Ahmedabad,
So
Bombay.
you got the data, those data.
No. This is there's a
Census,
Yeah.
that's so.
what is it? NSS.
Yeah.
National Sample Survey. Yeah. So if you see here, actually the affordability starts somewhere around much above the income ranges of the whole city. This is the basic housing type. Density slum type of housing. If anybody wants to have, at least that's at the much higher level than what their affordability is. So this is actually why the housing and the affordability of the people becomes much important to understand. Now, this is the context of the river basin where we worked on some socioeconomic vulnerability of the population. This is the location of our study area. This is the one of the states called Sikkim, and it's the river. This blue line it flows originates actually in the glaciers of Sikkim and comes down into this state is called West Bengal, and after around 300 kilometers it enters into Bangladesh and further it goes into Brahmaputra and subsequently to Bay of Bengal. And we have actually plotted all the cities on the basin and how much population they have. And here I'm actually showing the results. This data set actually, very interesting. Usually we don't have data sets where we can see the population geographically. I mean, of course, US and Europe has the data sets, but for India we don't have any data set which is showing the population on a space. So this data set is interestingly published by Oak Ridge National Library of US. But this is a very good data set which shows your population at a scale of 1:1, 1 by 1 square kilometer.
In terms of density?
In terms of density. So this is one of the very low level data set, but unfortunately they decided to go corporate. So now the data is no more free.
There's no socioeconomic data in this.
It's only in the tables.
It's just.
It's in the census tables. So we used those census indicators and we applied those indicators onto the special data set so that we know how much of population of what socioeconomic conditions are where. Because the geographical understanding of the population which is vulnerable is more important than actually having the numbers. So we actually went through the physical dispersion of the population. Of course, we did some very random cross-checking. So here what we are seeing is the distribution of male and female population, where we have more concentration and where we have less concentration. The darker browns are the population, higher population, and the yellow one, little lighter yellow are the ones where there is not much population. And of course, within that we have extreme age groups, people who are disabled in fact, and all these indicators. Similarly, we had, of course, children and a little bigger map, children and elderly people. And then we have, of course, people who are from India can understand. We have a different social class called scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. There are people who are socially a little backward and without much resources to be in the economic front. So this is the places where the population of the scheduled tribes and castes are a little more.